Okay, let's see. Is this thing working? Yeah, I'm green. Okay, cool. Perfect, 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 perfect. Sorry, just got a couple things I need to set up. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today is the fact that I think there's a tendency to think about the hooks as mounting, as we've done with classes before, and this will be pretty quick today, but that's kind of a broken concept. In all the documentation that I've seen, and you can read all of it here. Let's see, this one, docs. So, oh, you can't see the top of my screen, sorry. It's the use the effect hook. Um, this one talks about how to think of use effect and how it's distinctly different from the concept of mounting. And that now effects are a little bit more like renders in time, as opposed to the idea of like this component mounted, it's updated, and then it unmounts. Really, the use effect hooks, even though they have two parts, that kind of like setup and tear down, those happen every time. So if you're subscribing to something, every render you're subscribing and unsubscribing, subscribing, unsubscribing, subscribing, unsubscribing. Now you can opt out of that with inputs, which allow you to say like, unless these inputs change, don't unsubscribe, right? Now I think that comes into effect, like when we think about unmounting, we think about it differently because we think like, okay, we're gonna mount, all these updates are gonna happen, and then we're gonna unmount. And that's not the case anymore. These happen in tandem every time unless you opt out. So let's go into an example of that. So I built up this extremely trivial example sorry, of what we're kind of demonstrating here. So let me rerun this because obviously it's not working. Oh yeah, it is working. Okay, so let's run through this. So first of all, in the public, I have HTML. I have two roots, if I can find them. Yeah, so I have root one and root two, and what I'm doing is I am just mounting a function component at root one and a class component at root two, and in this, I have like a little bit of setup, so I am basically rendering this component, and then I'm rendering over it again with new props, and then the same for the class. I'm rendering it with Chantastic, and then I'm rendering it again with a new prop. And in this one, I'm actually, in the class case, I am unmounting it, right? So in this case, that's only going to happen predictably at the end. So let me see. Hey, what's up, Emily? How's it going? Good to see you. Okay, so this is going to happen just at the end of that life, right? Like, so mount, do all the things, unmount. Hooks are totally different. So we can see this in the, what gets logged out at the bottom here. So the class fires Michael predictably because that's what the second render was. However, the hook doesn't really have like an unmount concept, right? We'll look at my hook in a second, but so let's look at the hook. So here's the class, just so you can see that I don't have anything on my sleeves. Like I just have component will unmount, and then it's just logging that it unmounted. So here's the hook. Now I'm going to write a couple different hooks, but this was part of a discussion that I was having on Twitter where a lot of people assumed that basically if you had a return value and then you said don't ever update, that this would be like kind of the last render. And that was my initial thought as well. It's easy to think of it like that, but that's not actually the case. Anytime you see this, it means that it's going to happen first render, which means that this whole thing, this like cleanup or the second argument to, or the return of useEffect, it means that this is only going to fire as the cleanup, the second part of that effect on the first one. And we're seeing that here. If I open up my log again, we're seeing that so it fires only when component is unmounted the first time, and so it unmounts, or it logs out Chantastic, which was the first value. And so I can put any number of like updates in here, and it's only ever going to fire Chantastic. Right? So like it doesn't matter. Like it's doing that hook only for the first render, that first cycle. Remember, the cycles are tighter now. They're not like start and updates in between. It's like every single time they're paired. So I want to kind of like show you some of the things that like led up to me thinking that maybe this would work. So let's see. So let's. Sorry, I had 2 cups of coffee today, which is at least twice as much coffee as I usually have, so I'm a little wired. And it's like a crazy, all of the company is at the office today, and it's wild and crazy here. Anyways, I'm trying to fit this in. But yeah, so let's see if, hey, Raphael, how's it going? Welcome, welcome, thanks for showing up. So I wanted to kind of play with like different effects here, right? So, so we have so like if we wanted to use like use first render, oops, not like that. We can make a custom hook for using the first render, right? And that would look something like this. So we'd have a function use first render. That would call useEffect. Oops. And then that would do something. Console.log first. And then we don't ever want it to update, so we're going to give it an array of no things to watch, right? So if we leave this empty, that's going to fire every single time. So actually, let's write every first. So use every render. Every. Okay, so okay, so if we do this, we see that it rendered every twice, right? And then we have our class unmount. Let's not render the classes for this part. Okay, every. So the more updates we do there, so I have 4 now, so it's going to render every time, 4 times, right? Okay, so let's do one that's going to be render first. So we still have 4. So if we wanted to do use first, we could do something like that. It's going to be almost the same thing, right? First render. Let's change this to first. Use first render. Use our custom hook there. Okay, now it's the same right now, but what we're going to do is we're going to pass it that second argument, which is the inputs to watch. Now, because there's no inputs in there, it has no values to track, so it's only going to render the first time. So even though we kind of re-rendered 4 times, it's just doing the first time because it's not tracking any inputs to update on. Now, if we gave it inputs, then anytime those inputs changed, so we can pass those along. So props dot, what was it, name? Yeah, name. Props dot name. If we pass that along, now it'll update 4 times. Oh, sorry. No, it's just going to run first and the update. Sorry, not 4 times, because I copied the same name. So every time this changes, oh yeah, so it's just logging out first. But you can see it every time that there's an actual change, it'll render whatever we put. Okay, cool. So let's go back to that. Let's change our use first to actually work again, because this, the one that we just did, is actually like first and update. First and update. So I should have copied that code because that's exactly what I'm writing right now. And update. So that's going to take some inputs. We're just going to pass those along. So basically, and yeah, anyway, this is not how you would write custom hooks. This is just to demonstrate like how these things update. So like forgive the nonsense of like how these are named or whatever. This is just to illustrate how they fire. So let's see, first and update. We're just going to give an array of props.name, right? Okay, cool. So we see that it fires the first time, my goal. If I keep copying this, we should see no change. If I change one of these, it'll change only on that one. Okay, cool. So we have first and update now. Now, the thing, let me see if there's any questions. Coffee, yes. Woo. Okay, so yes, so that is so that's where we're at. Now, naturally, you kind of start to think that, so there's this like second thing that if you return here, you can return a cleanup function, right? Which would be like at the end of everything. But that's not actually how it works. As you can see, this is like at the end of that effect, right? So every time that renders, this is the end of that thing. So there's an inclination to think that you could use kind of the old way of thinking about mounts and do something like this. Let's see, use last or use on unmount. So the thinking is that you can borrow that idea from classes, that you can do something on the last render, right? Or let's see, on will unmount, I guess is the better way to think about it. Will unmount. So there's a tendency to think that you can do this, and you can't really, at least not as far as I can tell. You can do an update, which maybe I'll get to. It's already 4. So this idea that we can do like a use on will unmount or whatever, that we can basically get that same kind of functionality. And the implementation that I keep seeing is that you would use useEffect, you would have empty arguments, and that you would use that you would just, how does it work? You would just return, is it? Yeah, so here where you would have a block and you would then have to like return something, you can just use kind of the implicit return here with the arrow functions, and last rendering. What am I doing here wrong? Syntax. Yeah, okay. But as you can see, this is not the case. This happens every render because it's happening on those tight like render feedback loops instead of like the one that we're used to thinking about on mounts, right? So this is all to say that the concept of mounts is not useful in hooks. You have to change your mental model of like how these like fire to basically be like after render, right? So yeah. This is not something, there's not this like kind of end event, right? Everything happens, there's not like a life cycle per se of like a component. It's like there are these